The grand procession moved through the heart of imperial Paris, a city of breathtaking, unblemished opulence. Golden carriages, drawn by genetically enhanced Ushint steeds, glided over polished obsidian streets, their surfaces gleaming under the filtered sunlight that pierced the perpetual Parisian haze. Arcades of towering, intricately carved marble, depicting scenes of divine right, imperial glory, and the unwavering beneficence of the reigning dynasty, lined the avenues. Each panel was a testament to the emperor's unquestioned authority and the divine mandate that supposedly flowed through his veins. The atmosphere, usually thick with the scent of horse manure and human sweat in a less advanced age, was now purified by unseen filtration systems carrying only the faint, sweet scent of ceremonial incense. Over the city hung a heavy atmosphere imbued with the weight of centuries of unbroken tradition, a silence that spoke not of peace, but of absolute, pervasive control. Citizens, meticulously dressed in regional, traditional attire, each garment a carefully regulated hue and pattern signifying their specific canton, social standing, and even their guild affiliation, knelt in unison as the imperial standard, a banner bearing the unified symbols of crown and cross, passed by. Their genuflections were practiced, synchronized to the rhythm of unseen chimes, their expressions a mixture of awe, reverence, and perhaps a deeper ingrained fear. Generations of enforced piety had etched these reactions into the very DNA of the populace. Automated drones, shaped like gilded cherubs with whirring, nearly invisible rotors, floated overhead. They subtly monitored the crowds, their optical sensors sweeping over faces, identifying any deviation from the prescribed posture of devotion, any lingering glance of skepticism, any micro-expression of dissent. Simultaneously, they project the emperor's benevolent visage onto the facades of buildings, his serene smile a constant, omnipresent reminder of his watchful presence. The very stones of Paris seemed to breathe the imperial will. It was May 2025, and this was a world where the Enlightenment, that pivotal period of intellectual ferment in the 17th and 18th centuries, had simply never occurred. The very foundations of modern thought, reason, individualism, human rights, and secular governance remained, at best, fringe curiosities, whispered in illicit academic circles or brutally suppressed by an ever-vigilant state. Absolute monarchy, aristocratic privilege, and unquestioned religious authority reigned supreme, their dominion unbroken by the intellectual and political upheavals that had reshaped our own history. The pivotal divergence unfolded during a prolonged period of intense religious and dynastic conflicts across 17th and 18th century Europe. In this timeline, the 30 Years' War, rather than concluding with the Peace of Westphalia and its nascent principles of state sovereignty, escalated further. It became even more devastating and prolonged, a multi-generational conflagration that bled Europe dry, decimating populations and razing once flourishing cities. Subsequent conflicts, rather than leading to a balance of power, spiraled into a continuous state of low-level warfare and perpetual instability. This unending turmoil fostered a desperate, almost primal yearning for strong, centralized authority, a benevolent, or at least powerfully effective hand to impose order on the chaos, to restore peace at any cost. The memory of endless war was a deep scar on the collective European psyche. In this climate of fear, exhaustion, and desperate hope for stability, intellectual discourse became tightly tethered to theological dogma and royal decree. Rulers and religious leaders alike, seeing the devastating consequences of unchecked thought and dissent, which they blamed for the preceding centuries of conflict, sought to impose order through strict orthodoxy. The printing press, instead of becoming a tool for the widespread dissemination of diverse ideas, was largely co-opted, its output heavily censored and regulated to propagate approved narratives of divine right, imperial unity, and religious truth. Innovation in publishing was largely confined to intricate, beautifully illustrated religious texts and imperial histories. Figures like John Locke, whose treatises on natural rights laid the groundwork for modern democracy, either never emerged, their formative experiences different in a world steeped in autocracy, or their nascent ideas were swiftly and brutally suppressed. A Locke attempting to publish his 2 treatises of government in this timeline would find himself facing the Inquisition, not academic debate. Voltaire's biting wit and advocacy for civil liberties would have been met with the gallows, not salons. His satirical plays would be seen as direct affronts to the emperor's majesty. Rousseau's radical notions of the social contract and popular sovereignty would have been branded as dangerous heresy, concepts that invited chaos and rebellion. Montesquieu's theories on the separation of powers, designed to check monarchical excess, would have been seen as a direct attack on the divine right of kings, a challenge to the very foundation of imperial rule. This entrenched alliance of monarchs, aristocrats, and a universally powerful, unified church ensured that any spark of independent thought was extinguished before it could ignite. They formed a powerful, self-reinforcing bulwark against change, their interests inextricably linked. The perpetual instability of the long wars prevented the cross-pollination of ideas and the rise of independent intellectual societies, like the Royal Society or the French Académie des Sciences, which in our timeline provided spaces for open inquiry and empirical research. Instead, universities remained bastions of scholasticism and theological debate, carefully curated by ecclesiastical authorities, their curricula designed to produce obedient scholars and dutiful administrators, not independent thinkers. This allowed traditional hierarchies to retain absolute and pervasive control over all aspects of society, from grand policy to the minutiae of daily life. Without the Enlightenment, Europe never experienced its democratic revolutions. The Sacred Gallic Empire, a powerful consolidation of France and parts of former Habsburg territories, forged in the crucible of endless war and religious zeal, remained a dominant force. It was ruled by an emperor whose authority was considered not merely legitimate, but divinely ordained and beyond question. His word was law, his lineage a direct conduit to celestial power, a living embodiment of the divine will on earth. The concept of an elected leader was unthinkable, a grotesque absurdity. Other European powers maintained similar autocratic structures. The Holy Britannic Imperium, having crushed any nascent republican sentiment centuries ago, possibly through an even more brutal suppression of their own civil wars, stood as a maritime autocracy. Its monarchical line remained unbroken, its faith inextricably linked to the crown. The Anglican Church subsumed even more deeply into the state apparatus. The regal Hispanic dominion stretched across continents, its vast territories governed by viceroys who answered solely to the king in Madrid, a monarch who ruled with the full backing of a meticulously organized, all-pervasive church that had never undergone the reforms of the Council of Trent. The United Tsardom of Rus expanded even further into Asia, ruled by a czar whose spiritual authority was as potent as his temporal power, commanding immense loyalty from his devout subjects, whose faith was a deeply mystical and unwavering force. Constitutions, if they existed, were largely symbolic, granting power to the sovereign rather than restricting it. They were declarations of imperial might and divine grace, not social contracts. Parliaments were advisory bodies at best, filled with appointed aristocrats and high-ranking clergy, their purpose to rubber-stamp royal decrees and offer ceremonial fealty, not to represent the will of the populace. They were organs of the state, not of the people. The concept of universal human rights remained utterly alien. Legal systems were based on ancient traditions, often rooted in feudal codes, royal decrees, or most pervasively religious edicts interpreted by ecclesiastical courts. Individual liberties were practically non-existent, subject to the whim of the monarch, the judgment of a local lord, or the interpretations of a priest, with no inherent, inalienable protections. Justice was often swift, brutal, and served as a stark deterrent to dissent, with public executions serving as chilling reminders of imperial power. Science and technology did advance, but along profoundly different lines. Scientific inquiry was often patronized by royal courts or religious academies, its funding and direction dictated by the needs of the state or the church. Research focused relentlessly on practical applications that served the state, military technology for maintaining imperial dominance, advanced ballistics, fortified structures with automated defenses, silent chemical propellants for their genetically enhanced steeds, opulent public works that showcased imperial grandeur, vast hydraulic systems for fountains, climate control in palaces, advanced construction techniques for monumental architecture that defied conventional limits, or efficient resource extraction to fuel the empire's vast machinery, often through the use of advanced robotics in hazardous mining operations. Crucially, a significant portion of scientific effort was directed towards proving theological doctrines or validating existing social hierarchies, rather than challenging them. For instance, sophisticated biological engineering might be used to enhance agricultural yields for the nobility, or to create genetically stable human castes for specific labor roles, subtly reinforcing the social order through biological determinism. The rigorous empiricism and open intellectual exchange that characterized our scientific revolution were less pronounced. While observation and experimentation occurred, they were often compartmentalized, guarded as state or church secrets, and rarely subjected to the kind of free, widespread peer review that fostered rapid innovation in our timeline. New theories, especially those that might contradict established dogma, such as Copernican heliocentrism, which might never have gained widespread acceptance, were met with skepticism, if not outright suppression. Scientific progress was a carefully managed top-down process, not a spontaneous bottom-up explosion of inquiry. The Industrial Revolution, if it occurred, was delayed or took a different, more controlled form. It was less driven by free markets, entrepreneurial spirit, and individual enterprise, and more by state-controlled monopolies and directed labor. Grand imperial guilds, often overseen by powerful aristocratic families or religious orders, controlled entire industries, from textile production to steel manufacturing, from advanced robotics to pharmaceutical development. Labor was often organized along traditional, almost feudal lines, with vast populations of artisans and factory workers bound to their trades and employers through a complex web of duties and inherited obligations, enforced by both law and custom. This model served the needs of the ruling class, providing luxury goods and military materiel, rather than creating widespread consumerism or a robust middle class, which in our world became a powerful force for social and political change. Innovation was often incremental, driven by necessity or imperial decree, rather than the frenetic competition of a burgeoning capitalist system. The concept of mass production for a mass market was largely alien. Instead, goods were often produced for the elite or for specific state functions. Society remained rigidly hierarchical, its structure as unyielding as the marble arcades of Paris. Individualism was largely suppressed in favor of collective identity, duty to sovereign, church, or family. One's place in the intricate social pyramid was largely determined at birth, a divinely ordained destiny from which there was little deviation. Loyalty to the local lord, the parish priest, and ultimately the emperor was paramount, reinforced by centuries of indoctrination and a comprehensive surveillance system. Social mobility was rare, generally limited to extraordinary service to the crown or the church, or through careful aristocratic patronage. Education was controlled almost entirely by religious institutions or aristocratic academies. Its focus was not on critical thought or independent inquiry, but on obedience, moral instruction based on unshakable dogma and adherence to established doctrines. History was taught as a linear progression of imperial and religious triumph, carefully omitting any narratives of rebellion or dissent, or framing them as aberrations swiftly corrected by divine providence. Classical languages, theology, and courtly arts were emphasized for the elite, instilling in them a sense of their unique heritage and responsibilities, while the populace received practical instruction in their designated trades, interwoven with heavy doses of religious catechism and imperial propaganda, designed to foster unquestioning loyalty. Libraries, though grand and extensive, were meticulously curated, their contents screened for any subversive ideas, with forbidden texts locked away in high-security archives accessible only to trusted scholars for the purpose of refutation. Art and literature continued to be patronage-driven, serving as instruments of state and church propaganda. They celebrated religious piety, aristocratic virtues, and monarchical power, with little room for social criticism, romantic idealism, or revolutionary thought. Epic poems recounted the glorious deeds of emperors. Religious frescoes adorned cathedrals with scenes of miraculous divine intervention, and courtly dramas depicted the impeccable morality of the nobility. Experimentation with form or content that deviated from these prescribed themes was discouraged, often harshly, leading to a highly refined but somewhat stagnant artistic tradition. Public life was dominated by elaborate rituals, ceremonies, and festivals designed to reinforce the social order and the unquestioned authority of the rulers. The emperor's birthday, royal weddings, religious feast, each was a grand spectacle designed to awe the populace and remind them of their place within the cosmic order, a constant reaffirmation of the established hierarchy. Religion, primarily a unified and politically powerful church, perhaps an enduring, unreformed Catholic church, or a similar, dominant Protestant equivalent in different realms, albeit one that had successfully crushed sectarianism and forged a singular, dominant theology, maintained immense social and political power. It acted as a direct partner to the state in controlling information, morality, and public discourse. Its network of clergy reached into every village, every family, serving as both spiritual guides and agents of imperial control, reporting any signs of deviation to the proper authorities. Dogma was meticulously enforced, heresy ruthlessly punished, and any questioning of religious authority was tantamount to treason against the divine order. Secularism remained a dangerous, whispered heresy, its adherents driven underground or publicly purged as threats to both spiritual and temporal stability. Religious courts held significant sway, often operating independently of or in conjunction with royal justice, extending their reach into the most intimate aspects of private life, scrutinizing everything from marital fidelity to adherence to dietary laws. European colonialism unfolded differently, driven more by a quest for glory, religious conversion, and traditional power politics than by economic liberalism or a civilizing mission rooted in Enlightenment ideals. European empires might have been even more ruthless in their suppression of local cultures, or more focused on maintaining direct, autocratic control over territories. Without the philosophical underpinnings of universal rights, however imperfectly applied in our timeline, the concept of treating colonized peoples as anything other than subjects to be exploited or converted would have been even weaker. Empires would have been less concerned with establishing administrative structures designed to extract resources for a burgeoning consumer market, and more focused on maintaining direct, autocratic control through military garrisons, religious missions, and the imposition of feudal structures on conquered lands, often mirroring the hierarchical structures of the colonizers. Conversely, other powerful non-Western empires, less challenged by Western liberal ideals, might have retained greater autonomy and influence. The Ottoman Empire, for instance, might have continued its slow decline without the external pressures of liberalizing Western powers, but it might also have solidified its own conservative structures, perhaps even experiencing a resurgence of traditional power under a powerful sultan or caliph. The Qing dynasty in China, unburdened by the opium wars driven by Western free trade demands and unchecked capitalism, might have developed its own distinct philosophies of governance and societal order, or even become a dominant global power, albeit one founded on its own hierarchical traditions and a deep-seated suspicion of foreign influence. The rise of a powerful, unified Japan would also have taken a different trajectory, possibly leading to a more traditional, emperor-centric expansion across Asia. Global trade, while robust, was more heavily controlled by state-chartered monopolies and noble houses, rather than free markets. Trade routes were carefully regulated, tariffs were high, and merchants operated under strict licensing, often serving the interests of their imperial patrons rather than pursuing independent wealth. Smuggling and black markets would undoubtedly exist, but they would be dangerous, underground activities. In 20, the world was a complex tapestry of powerful, traditional empires and kingdoms, each maintaining its own distinct brand of absolutism. Technology, while advanced in certain areas, often served to reinforce existing power structures. Communications were sophisticated, enabling instantaneous global decrees from emperors to their furthest viceroys, but also heavily monitored and controlled. Omnipresent surveillance networks, operated by ministries of public order, or their equivalents in other empires, utilized advanced optical sensors, sound analysis, and even nascent forms of biometric recognition to ensure compliance and detect dissent. Personal privacy was an alien concept, traded for the illusion of security and order. Transportation was efficient for state and military purposes, with high-speed magnetic levitation trains connecting imperial capitals and strategic outposts, and advanced aerial carriers transporting elite troops, but less so for individual mobility, which was often restricted and regulated through a complex system of internal passports and travel permits. Grand public works, massive architectural projects, and ceremonial robotics were common, all designed to showcase the grandeur of the ruling powers and reinforce the social hierarchy. Automated maintenance drones polished the obsidian streets, colossal automatons depicting imperial heroes guarded public squares, and intricate clockwork mechanisms animated vast tapestries in royal palaces, performing synchronized dances for public viewing. Basic needs were met for the populace, ensuring a stable, if not luxurious, existence. But individual aspirations beyond one's station were generally discouraged. Ambition was channeled into loyal service to the emperors or the church, not into independent enterprise or social mobility. The ideal citizen was content, dutiful, and unquestioning. Valerius, the imperial censor of ideological purity for the sacred Gallic Empire, sat in his office deep within the ministry's labyrinthine complex in Paris. The building itself was a brutalist monument to control, its black reflective surfaces absorbing all light, its interior corridors silent and cold, patrolled by silent, automated sentinels. His workstation, a seamless holographic interface, showed a cascade of real-time communication streams, filtered by sophisticated AI for ideological deviance. Every word, every image, every interaction within the empire was potentially subject to this automated scrutiny, cross-referenced against vast databases of approved and forbidden thought. The very air in his sterile, modern office hummed with the silent thrum of power, derived from the great fusion reactors that served the imperial palace and the ministry. Clean energy harnessed for the purposes of absolute control and stability. His latest flag was a string of coded messages. meticulously pieced together by the AI from fragments across the illicit infonet, a hidden layer of communication beyond the imperial web, unalienable rights, popular sovereignty, government by consent. These were archaic, dangerous concepts from what imperial historians termed the Age of Disordered Dreams, a brief, failed spark of proto-Enlightenment thought that was swiftly extinguished centuries ago. These ideas, preserved only in tightly controlled, forbidden academic archives for the purpose of historical refutation, to be studied by loyal scholars solely to understand their errors, were never to reach the common populace. They were intellectual pathogens, agents, capable of unraveling the very fabric of their meticulously constructed world, a serene order built on unquestioning obedience. Valerius activated a neural interface link to the public broadcast network, allowing the sensory data of the grand procession to flow directly into his consciousness. He watched the live feed of the Emperor's birthday parade, a dazzling display of military might, religious pageantry, and aristocratic splendor. Armored legions marched in perfect lockstep, their polished chrome reflecting the gilded cherub drones overhead, their synchronized movements a testament to imperial discipline. Priests in ornate vestments swung censers, their chants harmonizing with the solemn imperial anthem, a hymn to divine authority. Duchesses in gem-encrusted gowns rode in carriages, their faces models of serene aristocratic grace, their very presence a symbol of inherited privilege. The crowds cheered on cue, their faces reflecting pious devotion, their collective joy a well-rehearsed performance. Each individual's role perfectly executed. A well-ordered society, he mused, a faint, almost imperceptible smile playing on his lips, where every soul knows its place, finds contentment in duty, and draws strength from the immutable truths revealed by church and crown. He felt a deep sense of satisfaction, a quiet pride in the intricate machinery of control that maintained such perfect harmony. He closed the feed and returned to his task. The AI had traced the subversive messages to a small, unsanctioned study group operating in a forgotten corner of the Quartier Latin, an area traditionally associated with scholarship, but now largely controlled by minor religious orders and state-approved academies. Its ancient cobblestones now paved with polished obsidian. Their leader, a minor academic specializing in comparative political anomalies within the Imperial Historical Institute, was using historical texts from the Age of Disordered Dreams to formulate radical theories, daring to suggest that there was an alternative, that society could be structured differently, based on individual liberty and popular will. Valerius sighed, a soft exhalation that barely disturbed the silence of his office. Another round of arrests, another re-education mandate. Another minor purge. It was tedious work, the constant vigilance against the insidious creep of independent thought, the subtle corrosion of order. But it was essential. The stability of the empire, the very continuation of their ancient order, depended on ensuring that the dangerous embers of independent thought were never allowed to rekindle and disrupt the serene, unquestioned authority that defined their world. And Valerius, the silent guardian of imperial dogma, was determined to keep it that way, for the good of all as he understood it.